In the Fast Track Chapter 2, we got a brief introduction to creating titles with the Avid Title tool, the very basic titling program that comes with Media Composer. In this chapter, we're going to take a look at two more titling programs, Avid Marquee, which comes bundled with Avid Media Composer, and New Blue Titler Pro, which comes as a titling effect within the effect palette. And in this movie, we're going to explore the basics of working with Avid Marquee. So I am just going to park my playhead on the clip where I want to put my title. And as you can see here, I just put a basic backdrop right before we get to Caroline. Okay, so here is her backdrop behind her chroma key, and I have the same thing here, and this is where we're going to put our title. And we have the music on underneath this. So I'm going to come up to Tools and Title Tool Application, and then this asks me if I want to go into Marquee or Title Tool. And this persist checkbox means that Media Composer will open the same titler each time without asking me. Right now, I do want it to ask me because I occasionally might want to use the title tool, so I'm just going to check Marquee without choosing persist. So Marquee opens, and it's a new application that floats on top of Media Composer, which is running in the background. So if I went back and changed the frame that my playhead was resting on, it would likewise change here in Marquee. This isn't part of the title, by the way, it's just the reference frame. If you'd rather not use a reference frame, you can click on this background button here, and you can design your title without the reference background. We are going to use it, though, and we're also going to choose the Safe Title, Safe Action lines. The inner border here are the safe title lines, and you should really make sure that all of your title elements stay within these inner boundaries. Let's come over here to the Marquee tool palette. We have two that we want to touch on right away, the Text tool and the Edit tool. The Text tool allows me to type my text, so if I just select that and click in my video frame, a bounding box will appear, and as I type, the bounding box will expand. Then I can go back to my Edit tool and move this around. Notice that when I increase the size of my bounding box, my text remains the same size, but if I hold down Option or Alt on a PC as I drag, it will get larger. The proportions are not constrained, so it allows me to stretch and squeeze this. So I'll undo that. And if I hold down Option and Shift, or Alt and Shift on a PC, the proportions will be constrained. Also, notice when I move my text around that it snaps to my safe title line, so that can be useful as well. Up here at the top, I have a toolbar, and I can select the basic elements of my text. Now, most of these are pretty standard features in any word processing or graphics creation program, but there are a couple of different features, so I just want to go through this briefly. So here I can choose a font, and unfortunately this isn't one of those programs that actually previews the font so you can see what it looks like, but c'est la vie. So for this, I'm just going to choose Verdana. And notice that when I did that, my text wrapped. So occasionally when you increase the font size or when you choose a different font, it will become larger than the bounding box boundaries. So you just make that larger, and we're back on one line here. To the right of font is font size, and you can type in a new size here, or you can actually use this value shuttle. Okay, as I drag up and down, the font increases and decreases in size. And if you want to reset the size, you just click on this reset button right here. I'm just going to increase it just slightly here and make my bounding box big enough to accommodate for that. Coming over here, I can change the value of my kerning. Kerning is the space between my letters. So again, I can type in a value or have a value shuttle here that allows me to adjust that. Again, as I increase the size of my text and it goes beyond the borders of the bounding box, you can just increase that. In fact, if you just want to make this large to begin with, might not be a bad idea. Another reason for that is that if you have a bounding box that goes across the entire frame, your justification might be a little bit easier. Now Align Center is actually going to align this within the center of the bounding box, which in turn aligns it within the center of the frame. So I'm going to bring my kerning down just a little bit, and you can see that because I'm aligned to the center, it's shrinking back towards the middle. There's also Align Left, Align Right, and Justify. And then there's this option here, Equally Space, where it spreads it out. We'll go back to Center, and I skipped over my color well here. I have a couple ways that I can choose colors. If I click on this button here, it opens up my color picker, and as I go through these, you can see that it adjusts live. Down here, I have a color palette, so this gives me a whole host of colors available. And then if I click down here, it opens up the Mac or Windows color picker, where I have the ability to adjust the hue, saturation, brightness, and opacity. Let me cancel out of here because there's one more thing that I'm interested in, and that's this eyedropper. And so if I click on this and then grab a color from the background, say this nice orangish color, then I can access that. All right, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to take my text tool again and type another word, the word art. And let's go ahead and increase the size of that. So I'm just going to Shift and Option and drag, make it nice and big, okay? And I want it to be cursive. So I think brush script italic is what I want. So I'm going to choose that. Yep, that's about right. And we want to move that to the back. So I'm going to take my object menu and say send to back. So that's the general look, but we'll clean that up as we continue modifying the title. Now let's come over here to the Quick Title Properties window. Up at the top is another color well, and it matches the color well over here. Okay, so if I choose hot glass, you can see that those match, and I can likewise choose a color picker, the color palette, or the Mac or Windows color picker, or the eyedropper. Over here is opacity. There's a master opacity and a main surface opacity. The master opacity brings the opacity down of the entire element, whereas the main surface is the surface that we see now. Because the titles can go into 3D, there are other surfaces, and we'll explore that later. But what I do want to do with opacity is take my art word and bring its master opacity down, about like that, okay? And now we'll go back to hot glass and continue modifying that. I'm going to skip over lighting for now, but I'm going to explore this Enable Gradient button. I'm going to check that, and let's take a look at what's happened here. So it's produced a local letter-based gradient all the way across the board. Now, rarely do you ever want it to look like this, so there are a couple of gradient controls that you can adjust. First, I'd like to actually choose my own gradient colors. So I'm going to uncheck this tint button, and then I'm going to right-click in this little triangle here and choose a color. Again, I'm going to choose my eyedropper and grab my orange again. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, right-click and choose a color. And in this case, I'm going to choose this yellow color right here. So we have the local gradient going from our orange to our yellow. The way that we can change this local gradient to another type is by changing our mapping here. So right now it's on local. I'm going to change it to container. And the container in this case is the bounding box. So if I changed the bounding box boundaries, you can see the gradient sort of change as well. You can also change the orientation here. Right now it's vertical. I can change it to horizontal and also radial. So I'm going to do horizontal, and you can also rotate it. You can see here that I'm rotating my gradient. So let's say that I want the orange to be on the bottom. So about right there. And I think that's okay. Down here, I want to take a look at my drop shadow. I'm going to enable this. And you can see that things pop out a little bit better here. By default, it produces a 50% opaque shadow. I like my shadows just a little bit crisper, so I'm going to use this value shuttle here to bring that up a little bit. Also notice that I have the ability, just like in the title tool, to sort of drag this around to define where my shadow is. So I'm going to bring it in just a touch closer here. I could also change my shadow color if I want, but I'm going to leave that alone. Finally, I just want to cover shapes quickly. If I go straight from designing text with all of these properties in the Quick Title Properties window to a shape, it's going to take on all of these characteristics. So if I click on the rectangle tool and I draw a shape, maybe going across the entire tool like this, you can see that I have my gradient, I have my drop shadow. If I instead click outside of the Quick Title Properties window and then click on the rectangle tool, I just get a white shape that I can modify from scratch. All right, so depending on whether you go straight into creating a shape from working in the Quick Titles Properties window, or if you click out of it and then make another shape, that determines the characteristics that your shape takes on. All right, I'm going to delete this one. And for this one, in the interest of time, I'm just going to get rid of the drop shadow. And we'll go ahead and bring the opacity way down. And we'll also send it to the back. And bring the opacity down even more than that. All right, so this was a very quick lesson on creating a basic title in the Marquee Title tool, staying primarily within the Quick Title Properties window. In the next movie, we'll go deeper into Marquee's capabilities, but for now, I just want to show you how to save this into Media Composer. I'm going to come up to File and Save to Bin. I'm just going to call this Hot Glass Title, and OK. and it's going into my 12.1 bin. That's fine. I'll change my resolution to 1:1 and save. And there's my title. If I want to cut this into my sequence, I like to put it on its own track, so I'm going to press Command-Y or Control-Y on a PC. I'll patch V1 to V4 and turn those off. And let's just mark an in and an out and overwrite B. And now, instead of it just popping on and off, let's go ahead and give it a title fade. Here within this fast menu, I just click on this little E here, and I like a title fade of 8 frames up, 8 frames down. And let's just take a look at this. And there we go. So we'll use this title as a jumping off place to modify in the next movie.